42 years. That's how long Grace Miller had spent being invisible. A housewares saleswoman at a department store, an expert at serving with a smile and tucking dreams away in a drawer. Grace was always the type of person who lived for others. Discreet, polite, the kind no one notices when she walks in, but everyone misses when she's gone. She made lists of recipes she never cooked, places she never visited, clothes she never dared to wear. She dreamed of living more, but always thought she still had time. Until, during a routine checkup, she heard the words that turned her world upside down. You have only a few weeks to live. Groundless, planless, with no one to embrace. Grace looked at her own list and did something no one expected. She didn't wait for the end. She went to live, for real, and that's when everything began. But before we continue, tell me something. Where are you watching this story from? What's your city, state, or country? I want to see how far Grace's story will touch hearts. The woman nobody saw. Grace Miller was the type of person who went unnoticed. She wasn't the most talkative on the team. She never drew attention with what she wore. She'd worn the same hairstyle for years, comfortable shoes, and barely perceptible makeup. She worked as a saleswoman in a department store in the cookware section. For 15 years, she knew the names of the pans by heart, the best brands, and even the tricks that pleased each customer. But almost no one knew her name. It was as if she was there. But at the same time, she wasn't. Everyone knew her as the friendly lady from the back aisle. Always helpful, always smiling, never absent, never complained, never asked for anything. She was invisible in a polite way, the kind that hurts in silence. Grace brought her packed lunch every day, homemade food, and ate alone in the cafeteria, not out of isolation, but because she didn't want to bother anyone. She was too gentle to interrupt a conversation. She took care of others, but forgot about herself. Sometimes she'd look at her reflection in the display window and wonder, when did I stop existing for myself? She lived on autopilot, woke up, worked, came home. Her list of dreams was kept in a drawer, not out of fear, but out of habit. Years ago, she'd written on this list with enthusiasm: travel to Europe, dine at a Michelin-starred restaurant, ride a cable car in the snow. Now, she'd only mentally add, maybe someday. Grace was passionate about cooking. Secretly, she watched videos of famous chefs and tested recipes late into the night. But she never dared to serve anyone. She never thought she was good enough. Her hands trembled just thinking about someone tasting what she cooked. In the store, people passed by her as if she were part of the furniture. Customers asked for help and didn't even wait for a good morning. Co-workers forgot her name at happy hours. And still, she smiled. Every day, with a lightness that only those who've learned to be silent carry. On one of those ordinary, rainy, grey mornings, Grace arrived early at work, as always. But this time, she felt something strange. A weight on her chest, a different kind of fatigue. She replaced her smile with a deep sigh and leaned against the counter. It was on that day that she decided to schedule the exam she'd been postponing for months. And so, without fanfare, without announcement, and without applause, the woman nobody saw began to write the story that nobody would forget. Because sometimes it's the quietest people who hold the deepest screams. And Grace was about to be heard for the first time. A list hidden in the drawer. Among folded socks, cotton handkerchiefs, and an old recipe box lay a worn, covered notebook, blue with a few coffee stains. It was there that Grace Miller kept the most vibrant part of herself, her dreams. She called it My Wish Notebook, though no one else knew of its existence. It was something just hers, an intimate, almost childish secret that resisted time, even when reality seemed to ignore it. The first pages were full of enthusiasm. Large, colorful letters adorned with hearts. On them were phrases like, see snow up close, dine at a 5-star restaurant, travel alone, learn French, ride a cable car in the Alps, cook for someone I love. But as the years passed, the writing changed. The words became smaller, more discreet, the ink fainter, as if the dreams were shrinking along with the courage to realize them. The notebook, once left on the bedside table, began to live at the bottom of the dresser drawer, almost hidden, almost forgotten. Grace always had big dreams, but she was taught to wish small, to be grateful for what she had, and not to bother anyone. Dreaming big is dangerous, they'd say. Better not to get your hopes up. And she believed it. With each promotion that never came, each invitation that never arrived, each dinner she cooked for herself, the notebook was consulted with more caution and more sadness. Still, she couldn't bring herself to get rid of it, perhaps because it was the only proof that one day she wanted to live more than just exist. On that grey day, after the diagnosis, Grace arrived home in silence. She took off her shoes, turned off her phone, and sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, her eyes fixed on the drawer. She opened it slowly, like someone who knows they're about to face something too old to be ignored. When she picked up the notebook, her hands trembled. She opened it to the first page. She read. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time she felt anger. Anger at having postponed so much, at having waited for permission, at having been invisible even to herself. She turned the pages and read each line as if it were a sentence. See snow up close. Ride a cable car in the Alps. Cook for someone I love. It was then that she realized there was still time. Little, but there was. Perhaps not enough to do everything, but enough to do what mattered. That night, for the first time in years, Grace didn't pack her lunch for the next day. Instead, she sat at the table with a glass of wine, opened her laptop and searched best hotels with mountain views in Europe. Her fingers still hesitated, but her heart didn't. The notebook, which for so long had only been a shelter for dormant desires, now became a map, a compass, a reminder that life, even when threatened, can still be lived, and with intensity. And there, between old desires and yellowed pages, the new Grace Miller was born, the one who wouldn't wait anymore, who would chase after the little time she had left with a hunger for life she'd never felt before. Because when you have a list hidden in your drawer, maybe all you're really missing is the courage to open it. The diagnosis that changed everything. Grace had always been a woman of simple habits. She'd wake up early, drink her coffee slowly, and head to her job as a chambermaid at the Belmont Hotel, one of the most luxurious in the Alpine region. Guests came and went. Some left generous tips, others not even a glance. But she remained there, invisible, folding sheets and collecting memories that weren't hers. Until, on a cold Tuesday morning, the routine was interrupted. Sitting in the waiting room of the municipal clinic, Grace stared intently at the floor. The doctor had ordered a battery of tests due to a persistent cough that hadn't improved for months. She imagined it might just be bronchitis or, who knows, the accumulated stress of so many years carrying the world on her shoulders. But the doctor's gaze, as he called her in for the consultation, left no room for illusions. Grace, we found something concerning. She felt a chill run down her spine. The world around her blurred. The following words were a haze of medical terms and attempts at comfort. Carcinoma, advanced stage, metastasis, palliative treatment, cancer. The word no one wants to hear, the one that turns the timeline into a question mark. She didn't cry there. She just nodded, thanked the doctor, took the papers, and left. It was only on the bus ride back, surrounded by strangers, that it truly sank in. The tears came discreetly, almost ashamed. She didn't want to alarm anyone. Grace was always like that. She felt a lot, but showed little. Over the next few days, everything changed. The taste of coffee was no longer the same. The hurried pace of people on the streets began to hurt her eyes. How could everyone be so alive while she silently counted her own days? At work, no one noticed anything. Grace was good at it, hiding storms behind gentle smiles. But something inside her began to scream, an urgency, a suffocated desire to do something for herself. For the first time, she thought about quitting her job, about traveling, about looking in the mirror and seeing herself beyond the beige uniform and hairnet. It was at this moment that she decided to stop postponing life. With the little she had saved, she bought a one-way ticket to Switzerland, an old dream, almost forgotten. She remembered the photos she saw when she was young, snow-covered mountains, windows with flowers, comforting silence. There, perhaps she would find some kind of peace. Not a cure, she already knew what awaited her, but meaning. On the last night before the trip, sitting on the balcony of her small apartment, she wrote a letter, not to anyone specific, but to herself. You spent so much time being a supporting character that you forgot you are the protagonist. Don't let the pain steal your light. Live, Grace. Live what you can, however you can, until the last sip of wine, until the last sunset. And so, with a light suitcase and a heavy heart, Grace departed. The diagnosis changed everything. But paradoxically, it also freed her. By facing death head-on, she began, finally, to understand the value of life. She decided not to wait for the end. Instead of giving in, Grace made a decision no one expected. Grace arrived in Switzerland in the heart of autumn, when the golden leaves seemed to fall in slow motion, as if time itself was in a hurry to be beautiful. Her first morning in the village of Lauterbrunnen was filled with silence and contemplation. The air was pure, crisp, and the landscape seemed hand-painted by a whimsical artist. Waterfalls cascading down cliffs, wooden houses with flowers in the windows, and the snow-capped mountains watching over everything in the background. But it wasn't a farewell trip. No, Grace didn't want a last dance with life. She wanted to learn a new rhythm. In the first few days, she rented a small secluded chalet, simple, but with a view that made her take deep breaths and feel grateful. She started walking every morning, even with her tired body, even with the fatigue that sometimes felt bigger than her. It was on one of these walks that she met Elias, a gray-haired man painting watercolors by the lake. He greeted her with a smile and unknowingly opened the door to something new. Every day, Grace would pass by. Sometimes they exchanged words, other times just silences, but there was understanding in every gesture. She started painting with him, first hesitantly, then with courage, and each brushstroke was a relief, as if she was tearing fear from her skin and transforming it into color. Mornings stopped being a reminder of finitude. They became a celebration. One day, Elias said, "You paint like someone who has no time to lose." Grace smiled. It was true, and that was precisely the point. Instead of counting the days she had left, she started counting the days she made count. She enrolled in a creative writing workshop in the neighboring village, where she began to record her memories, turning them into short stories. She met tourists, locals, and shared smiles with strangers who would never know what was inside her. One afternoon, she received an email from the doctor. The most recent tests did not bring good news. The cancer was advancing, as expected. But Grace, for the first time, didn't cry. She read the words serenely, closed her laptop, and went to make tea. She had already decided she would not wait for the end, lying in a hospital bed. She didn't want death to find her standing still. She wanted death, when it arrived, to have to work to catch her. And then she did something even more unexpected. She wrote a letter to the Belmont Hotel. In the letter, she asked them to deliver an envelope to each chambermaid at the hotel, her colleagues of many years. Inside, there was a symbolic amount she had saved, a message of affection and an invitation. Don't wait for the world to fall apart to start living. Life is now. It always has been. Months passed. Grace didn't cure the cancer, but she healed much older wounds. Loneliness, invisibility, the feeling that her life wasn't hers. In Switzerland, she blossomed like someone who, knowing the last page was approaching, decided to write her own ending, without fear's commas. Without a hurried full stop, she decided not to wait for the end. And ironically, that's how she truly began to live. From the dressing room to the luxury hotel, from a store uniform to a 5-star suite in the Alps, and she still felt out of place. The soft carpet underfoot, the fireplace gently crackling, the delicate aroma of wood and lavender filling the air. Grace still stood, paused at the suite door, as if unsure whether she was allowed to enter. Her luggage had already been brought in. The hotel employee offered her a courteous smile before leaving, abandoning her, or almost. On the small table beside the sofa, a note rested in firm, elegant handwriting. "You deserve more than the world has given you so far. Enjoy every second. With affection, Olivia." Grace swallowed hard. Olivia was an old customer from the store where Grace worked. Designer clothes, expensive leather shoes, pricey sunglasses. Olivia was the personification of a successful, confident woman. And even with all the differences between them, the two had connected in an unusual way. One day, while Grace was helping her choose a dress for a gala, the customer noticed the attendant's headscarf and asked, without hesitation, "Are you undergoing treatment?" Grace, embarrassed, merely nodded. Olivia didn't press, but something changed in that instant. She started frequenting the store more often. Sometimes she bought things, sometimes she just talked. During one of these visits, she discovered that Grace had never traveled, had never flown on a plane, had never stayed in a hotel, not even a simple one. And now here she was, wearing a gift of a red dress, staying in one of the most luxurious hotels in the Swiss Alps, all paid for by a woman she barely knew, but who saw in her what many ignored. Grace walked to the balcony. The view was surreal. Snow-covered mountains shimmered under the golden light of late afternoon. The sky, tinged with pink and orange, looked hand-painted. She leaned on the railing, holding a glass of wine, and for an instant she allowed herself to just be. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, felt the cold, clean breeze touch her face like a caress, but inside her something still weighed her down. She was there, elegantly dressed, subtly made up, smiling with a mix of nervousness and gratitude, but part of her still felt like that woman in the cramped dressing room, folding clothes, erasing dreams. It's hard to see yourself differently when the world has always treated you as invisible. That's when she heard a voice from the bedroom. It was her own consciousness whispering, "You are alive. You are still here. And that is already a miracle." Grace smiled. For the first time, not in a formal or polite way, but a genuine light smile, full of meaning. Maybe she would never get used to luxury. Maybe she would continue to prefer filtered coffee over champagne. But now she knew she deserved more than just surviving. She deserved to live with intensity. That night, she lay on the cloud-soft bed. She closed her eyes and murmured a thank you, not just to Olivia, but to life, to fate, to the moment. And she promised herself that as long as her days lasted, they would be days lived with soul. An ordinary woman among millionaires. Grace walked through the hotel corridors as if she didn't want to be noticed. Yet, it was impossible not to notice her. Not because of a flamboyant dress or the sparkle of jewels, because she wore none. Grace drew attention in another way. There was something in her eyes, in the calmness of her gestures, in her shy and sincere smile that unnerved those around her. While guests spoke loudly about stocks, exotic destinations, and exorbitantly expensive watches, she listened in silence with a gentle curiosity. Amidst champagne flutes and exaggerated laughter, her presence was like a pause, a breeze in the midst of an atmosphere heavy with status and vanity. The staff noticed first. The chambermaid commented that the lady in room 801 always thanked them by looking them in the eye. The waiter said she smiled with her soul. The concierge confided that she asked his name, and the next day she remembered it. To the guests, it was as if she were a rare kind of remembrance, as if, seeing her there, alone on the balcony, contemplating the snow-covered mountains, they realized something they had long forgotten, the essential, because Grace carried no marks of luxury, but of life, and that made her a presence impossible to ignore. At the Saturday night gala dinner, the ballroom was a parade of designer clothes and inflated egos. Grace arrived punctually, wearing the same red dress, the one she had bought with economy and care, choosing every detail as one chooses a dream. It was simple, but on her it gained a different elegance. She didn't try to mingle. She sat at a more secluded table, observing the lights, the music, the people. And that's when a grey-haired gentleman, an automobile industry magnate, realized he was observing her more than the event itself. Accompanied by his third wife, surrounded by executives, he approached. "Good evening. May I sit for a moment?" he asked, unable to explain the sudden urge to be there. She nodded with a smile. They talked for minutes. Then others joined, and soon her table, previously empty, was surrounded, not by flatterers, but by the curious, all wanting to understand who this woman was, who seemed free, who smiled without expecting anything in return, who listened as if every word was important. Grace didn't talk about illnesses, she didn't talk about sadness, she talked about life, about her simple childhood, freshly brewed coffee, handwritten letters, her grandmother's scents. While they talked about figures, she talked about sensations, and without realizing it, everyone began to pay attention. That night, she wasn't just a woman among millionaires. She was a reminder, a kind of silent lighthouse illuminating what money cannot buy. When she returned to her room, alone, she took off her shoes, walked to the balcony, and looked at the starry sky. She didn't need anything more than that. For the first time in a long time, she felt that she was being seen, but more than that, she was being felt. And perhaps that was what hurt and comforted the most, knowing that, even with little time, she had finally become what she always was inside. An ordinary woman, yes, but extraordinary in what most people forget: presence. The chef who saw Grace's soul, Didier Moreau, a famous chef, finds a friend in her and an unexpected inspiration. The hotel restaurant was a spectacle in itself, with panoramic views of the snow-covered Alps and a wine list that made millionaires' eyes sparkle. It was a place where only the wealthiest dined. Grace, even staying in the most expensive suite, still hesitated to occupy that space. She felt like a dissonant note in an orchestra of luxury, but that night, something would change. She sat at a table in the corner, alone as always, wearing the same red dress she had already worn twice before, not for lack of options, but because in it she felt alive. As she delicately perused the menu, someone was observing her from the kitchen. Didier Moreau was a legend among French chefs. Michelin stars, international awards, magazine covers. But in this simple-looking woman, with gentle eyes and an uncovered head, he saw something no celebrity had ever conveyed to him: truth. "Who is that woman?" he asked the maitre d'. "Madame Grace Miller. Been staying for a week. Discreet. Never demands anything." That same evening, Didier decided to leave the kitchen, something he rarely did, and approached her table. "Bonsoir, madame. Allow me to be bold. Tonight, I don't want you to choose anything from the menu. I will cook for you. Something special." Grace, surprised, smiled. There was so much warmth in his gesture that she couldn't say no. During dinner, each dish was an unwritten letter, complex yet comforting flavors, spices that seemed to speak to the soul. Didier sat with her at the end, and the two conversed like old friends who had just reunited. He discovered she was a widow, a former department store employee, passionate about old books, and, most importantly, that she was living her final season of life. "What brought you here?" he asked, curious. "Because no one ever saw me, and for the first time, I wanted to see myself too. I wanted to feel that my life was worth something, that I had existed." Didier was silent for a moment. Then he said, "You have no idea how much you've already done that just by being here." In the days that followed, Grace became a frequent visitor to the kitchen. She didn't cook, but she sat on a stool, talked, smiled, told stories of her youth. Inspired by her, Didier created a new dish for the menu. He called it l'invisible, the invisible, a silent tribute to all the ordinary people, invisible to the world, but giants in soul. Some millionaire guests began ordering the dish, curious about its poetic description, and unknowingly, they were savoring the essence of a woman who decided to live intensely, even with her time numbered. Grace didn't know it, but in that corner of the hotel, she was leaving her mark, not with wealth nor with fame, but with humanity. And in that chef, she found someone who truly saw her. for the very first time, and that in itself made her life worth every second. 8. Meanwhile, Sean discovers the truth. A colleague from the store, who always loved her in silence, discovers what happened and sets off after her. In the silent routine of the department store, amidst clothing racks and creaking hangers, Sean still expected to see Grace at any moment. Always the same image, her passing through the accessories section with that calm step, her impeccable white blouse, and her gentle way of greeting even the grumpiest customers. But weeks had passed since she disappeared. Without warning, without a farewell, she just vanished. He had discreetly asked the management, her colleagues in the department, even the janitor, but no one knew for sure. Some said she had been fired, others that she had resigned. No one really cared, no one except him. Sean was a simple, shy man, and he always lived on the fringes of attention. He had worked at the store for over 10 years, managing the stockroom. He was the one who folded coats perfectly, who fixed broken hangers and straightened crooked tags. And for all those years, he loved Grace in silence. It wasn't an explosive passion, the kind that moves mountains. It was a serene love, like a cup of tea at the end of the day. He admired her thoughtfulness, her kindness, the way she listened to others. He knew she was a widow, and that she carried an old pain in her eyes, but he never had the courage to say what he felt, until he found the note. It was hidden among the HR papers, where Sean sometimes helped out of pure goodwill. A forgotten envelope with the name Grace Miller scrawled by hand. Inside, a medical report. Leukemia, advanced stage. Sean felt the world collapse. The words swam before his eyes, but what hurt most was imagining how much she had suffered. Alone. On the back of the envelope, there was something even more unexpected. A business card from a Swiss hotel, Mont Cervin Palace, with a note written by her. "I want to see the snow, perhaps for the last time." That was all he needed. Within a few hours, he had sold his small motorcycle, taken accumulated vacation days, and booked a modest ticket to Zermatt. He didn't speak French, knew nothing about luxury hotels, and barely knew how to behave in such a place. But none of that mattered. He needed to see her. He needed to say everything he had kept inside for years, even if it was too late. During the flight, he thought about the right words. He didn't want to seem like a soap opera hero. He just wanted her to know that, even without knowing it, she had been deeply loved, that someone cared, that she wasn't invisible. Upon arriving at the hotel, trembling with cold and nerves, he could barely explain to the receptionist who he was looking for. But merely saying the name Grace Miller was enough for the concierge to offer a gentle smile. "Ah, yes, Miss Miller. She's been here for days, charming. Everyone adores her. She's in the restaurant now." Sean took a deep breath. Perhaps it was destiny, or just a last act of courage from a man who had never been noticed. As he entered the glass-enclosed dining room, he saw her from behind. The same red dress, her short hair, the silhouette he knew so well. Sitting with a tall-hatted chef, laughing at something he was saying. Grace looked happy. He froze. Part of him wanted to retreat, not to interrupt that rare moment. But then, as if sensing his presence, she turned. Their eyes met, and in that surprised, bright gaze, he knew there was still time. 9. The reunion. Two hearts recognize each other in silence, and a confession that comes late, or perhaps just in time. Snow fell delicately on the pine trees surrounding the hotel. Inside, in room 208, Grace watched the infinite white through the window. Her slender hands held a cup of chamomile tea, but she barely felt its warmth. Time seemed suspended. Days dragged between appointments, medications, and thoughts that offered no respite. She was at peace, or so she told herself, until she heard a soft knock at the door. "Ms. Miller?" a female voice said from the other side. "You have a visitor." Grace frowned. "A visitor?" He said his name is Sean. The name struck her chest like a silent thunderclap. Sean, the guy who shared shifts at the store, the quiet friend, the only one who knew when she needed silence and when she needed a gentle good morning. the only one who looked at her as if she were important. Grace said nothing. She just nodded slowly, trying to understand what that gesture meant. Minutes later, the door opened. He was there. He wore the same old coat, his beanie askew, and a pair of brown eyes that couldn't hide emotion. He didn't say a word. He just smiled. Shy, crooked, sincere. Grace couldn't suppress a weak but genuine laugh. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, incredulous. "I came to see you," he replied, hastily taking off his beanie as if he'd committed a blunder. "I found out you were here and that you were sick." She lowered her eyes. "I thought no one knew. I knew. Late, but I knew. And I couldn't stay there. I needed to—" He paused, swallowed hard. "Needed to tell you some things." Grace gestured to the chair beside the armchair. He sat down slowly, like someone entering a sacred place. "Grace, I know I've never been good with words," he began, fidgeting with his nervous hands. "But all these years, you were the best part of my days. Even when you barely said hi, you made me want to show up for work. You brought color to the place." Grace smiled, her eyes welling up. "I always noticed," she said softly, "but I thought it was just my imagination. It wasn't. Never was. And I know I might have missed the right time to tell you this, but if there's still time, I'd like to stay here with you, not as a store friend, as someone who cares, even if it's just to make tea or tell bad jokes." She laughed again, this time with tears streaming down her face. "You took your time, Sean. I know. But you arrived, and that is everything." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was welcoming. It was as if time had stopped there, in that warm room, to allow two tired hearts to finally truly meet. Sean held her hand. There were no promises, no illusions, but there was presence. And for someone who thought she would die alone, that touch was a rebirth. 10. The last winter, when love arrives late, but still in time to warm the soul, and goodbye becomes a beginning. The following days passed like a whisper. Sean didn't ask questions. He simply was. He brought wildflowers picked from the woods, recited poorly memorized poems, laughed at his own jokes, and prepared tea with heart-shaped cookies, which, according to him, were culinary accidents with romantic intention. Grace watched him with tender eyes between one chemotherapy session and another. Her body no longer responded as before. Fatigue dwelled in her bones, but her smile was more present than ever. "You know you don't have to stay," she said one night, seeing him carefully adjust her pillows. "I know," he replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. "But I also know I need to stay." Silence. She reached out and touched his face. It was the first time she had done so. Sean closed his eyes, as if that touch healed old cracks. "I never really understood love," she confessed. "I don't think anyone does. But when you feel it, you recognize it." Grace looked out the window. Outside, snow covered everything in white, as if the world was waiting for a new beginning. "I'm scared, Sean," she whispered. "Me too, but I'm here." He then recited, in a trembling voice, a passage from a book she had mentioned years ago. "Some loves don't come to last a lifetime, but they come to give meaning to it." She smiled. That was it. The next morning, the nurse entered the room and found Grace sleeping, a slight smile on her lips. Her hand rested on Sean's, who was dozing in an improvised armchair. But something was different. Grace would not wake up again. The nurse gently called Sean. He understood even before hearing the words. He stood there, motionless. No tears, no despair, just holding her hand for another moment. "You didn't leave alone," he whispered, his voice choked, "and you won't be forgotten." A few weeks later, Sean returned to the store where it all began. The same broken clock, the same creaking stairs, the same bell above the door. But now the counter had a framed photo. Grace laughing with a flower in her hair. Above it, a small plaque read, "Here lived a woman who taught the beauty of silence and the strength of affection." Sean kept the store open. Every now and then he wrote letters to Grace and kept them in a blue box with her name painted in gold. He said that this way she still received his words, even if in another place. On the last day of winter, he walked to the frozen lake where Grace said she wanted to skate but never had the courage. He sat on the snow-covered bench and closed his eyes. The wind blew softly, and for an instant he swore he heard a laugh in the distance. That laugh, the one that made him want to live better. Sean smiled. It wasn't an end. It was the beginning of a new season. Epilogue. Some encounters last only a season. Others transcend time, even in silence. They say true love doesn't need grand declarations or eternal promises. It simply needs to exist, even for a short time, to change everything. Sean never loved another woman again, not because he was incapable, but because what he had with Grace was whole, even though it started late, even though it ended early. In the winters that followed, he always wrote her a letter on her birthday. Sometimes he'd talk about the store, other times he'd share dreams he had of her, as if they were still sitting on the park bench, sharing a coffee and watching the world go by. He spoke to her as one speaks to the wind, and the wind, in some way, seemed to reply. As the years passed, their story became a legend among the town's residents. They said that once, an old woman entered the store and claimed to have seen a woman sitting on the counter dressed in blue, smiling at the grey-haired man who was talking to himself with a box of letters. "You saw her?" Sean asked with a sparkle in his eyes. "Perhaps it was just a reflection," the old woman said, somewhat embarrassed. But he knew. He always knew, because true love leaves marks that cannot be erased, and it transforms into something greater, into memory, into silence, into peace. In the last note left in the blue box, Sean wrote only one sentence. "It's still you, even when time tries to convince me otherwise." And that afternoon, as the winter sun melted the last ice crystals, a breeze swept through the store. The bell on the door chimed on its own, and for an instant, everything lit up, as if love had returned, not to stay, but to remind him that it never left.